What's up, my miners of intelligence and consciousness? I'm Rick Brooks, and this is Rick's Mind. Today with me, I have guest Élodie Briefer, who's an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen. What's going on, Élodie? How are you?
Hi, I'm really good, thanks.
Fantastic. So I think, the best way to start this interview is for you to kind of introduce yourself, what you're studying, and how you got interested in the field of biology.
My main research area is the vocal communication. So how animals communicate, what do they tell each other, what can we find, which kind of information we can find in their vocalizations. And I started actually my PhD by working on birds, and a bird with a very complex song, which are called skylarks, and how they kind of make sequences out of small units to make something very complex. And then I moved on to mammals, and I've worked on goats and all kinds of other ungulates, mainly focusing on how they express emotions and how we can use their vocalizations to figure out about their emotions. And how did I fall into that? So I always worked, I always really liked animals when I was a child, so I always wanted to work on animals, but I didn't want to be a vet and cut animals out and see them in pain. I just wanted to observe them and see what they do. I was fascinated by their behavior. And then I found out when I was a teenager, about the field of ethology, which is the study of animal behavior, basically, especially in the wild. And then I found a team in my university where I was studying in Paris, where that was working on acoustics. So that's how I got into working on acoustic communication.
And so you had a few studies, and I'm wondering, when you're saying you're using vocal communication in mammals and birds to understand how they use vocal signals to encode information, like how does one study that? If you kind of take our listeners through how some of those studies were set up.
So it really depends what you're studying, of course, but the main thing would be going outside and recording them with a good quality microphone, for example, figuring out the context of production, in which context are they producing calls, what are the different factors around, and then going back to the office, plotting the sounds and analyzing them with some detailed acoustic software, so extracting all kinds of parameters and trying to see if we find which factor influence these parameters. Is it the context of production? Is it the identity of the individual, the region in which it's located, and other kinds of things that you can be interested in, their emotions, for example.
And now on you said you're using different regions, right, to study, and have you guys found a lot, like a myriad of differences, and let's say birds, same species of birds, correct? And are you finding different, dialects is the best word that comes to mind, in the different regions that you're studying? How big is the sample size?
So yeah, that's most songbirds have dialects. So dialect would be producing different, so these small units, we call them syllables. So they would produce them in different orders. That's what you call the dialect. And an accent would be producing the same unit, if you want, with different frequencies or different duration or different acoustic structure. So in skylarks, that was actually the focus of my PhD. So looking at how different skylarks from different places organize their units differently. And I found out that actually when they are more than 2 kilometers apart, they do have different sequences. And they use these sequences to recognize who's from the dialect area and who's what we call the stranger. So who's a neighbor and who's a stranger. Because a stranger doesn't have a territory, at least they don't know of. So it's more of a threat than a neighbor. And so they usually also react more to the song that they don't know, so dialect that they don't know, than neighboring dialects. And if you mix these units around, so if you change the sequence, then they don't recognize it anymore. So they have a very specific sequence that is the part of the dialect.
Whoa, that's fantastic. Now, is this just found in primarily you're focused on skylarks. Were you focused on any other types of bird species? And I guess even a more broad question would be, do you think that this is all over the animal kingdom?
So I haven't myself, but I have many colleagues like acousticians that work on all kinds of bird species, and this has been a field that has been studied a lot in the past 100 years, let's say. And in all songbirds, I think we find dialects because they learn their songs. So songbirds are known to learn their vocalizations when they grow up. So they will either learn from the birds that are around them, or move somewhere else and then learn from the new neighbors, and then develop different dialects, basically. So you find that in all songbirds, but also in other species. And for example, moving on to ungulates, which is what I studied afterwards, you don't find really dialects because they have more simple vocalizations, like very short calls, but you find accents. So in goats, we found that they do have accents. The goats that grow up in the same group will have different acoustic structure than goats that grow up in a different group.
That's so crazy. I think that's awesome. I mean, now, do you kind of feel comfortable saying that, I mean, especially songbirds, you think that they are communicating and passing on information, right? And like, to what degree of, are they able to kind of communicate to each other? Because, all right, for example, I understand that crows or ravens are super intelligent. Like they'll outperform, I think, toddlers, maybe even, I don't know, someone in the 5 or 6 range. John, maybe you might want to pull that up. I feel like I might be talking out of my ass a bit here, but I was just wondering in songbirds, like how intelligent are these animals? Just, I know that's a broad question, but I'm kind of crazy, so I'm wondering, and if I could get your opinion on like how much of this, like, are they having conversations, kind of, is what I'm trying to ask you.
I mean, so far what we can figure out about songbirds is that they're, at least the songs that they produce mainly during the breeding season, usually it's mostly the males, but also sometimes females, depending on the regions that sing. And they will usually sing to mark their territory and attract females. And from the evidence so far, it looks like the single units that they produce and the way they organize them mainly reflect their information about themselves. So their fitness, like how good of a male they are, how large is their territory, maybe testosterone levels, their age, who they learn the song from. So all kinds of things about themselves, but not necessarily about the context or like meaning per se, as we would call it in ourselves. So not about, they don't have a different, if you want, each unit or each song doesn't have a different function. The function is to attract the female. So it's quite different from other species, for example, meerkats or other species that will have a different call for each predator that comes around, where this is more close to what you would call a word in human language.
Okay. All right. So primarily in the... Oh, go ahead, John. What was that?
Oh, so you are correct. They're, according to a study called "The Ravens Parallel Great Apes in Flexible Planning for Tool Use and Bartering," ravens are smarter than most human children.
Yeah.
They say that it's like an analogous intelligence for tool use to great apes and humans.
Yeah, those birds are smart, and I know that cuttlefish as well are like very intelligent. I was at a I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Andrew Huberman. He studies the brain, and it's quite early here, so my brain's not firing on all its cylinders. But I had to get you on here because time difference be damned. But basically, one of the studies that he had, John, you'll have to pull this up too because I'm running on fumes here. But the cuttlefish were feeding these cuttlefish every day at this same doctors, and they were able to recognize these doctors, and they brought in a different professor, and they couldn't find the cuttlefish, right? Because they're able to camouflage themselves. And when they finally found them, they're at the top of their tank. They'd completely, I don't know if they're translucent, and they had one eye on following all of them, this new person, and they were able to, like, because they didn't trust this person, they were able to recognize human faces, and that was kind of a crazy thing. And I definitely butchered that study, but John, you'll back me up whenever you find it. But
I did find it. It was a test designed for cognitive recognition for human children, and it cuttlefish passed it.
Yeah. So there's some wild things going on in the animal kingdom. And that's why, people such as yourself are incredibly important. Because, I definitely think, as human beings, we have this notion that we're probably the smartest thing on the planet, and I'm not 100% convinced. What makes us great is that we're able to manipulate our environment, and there's very few species that are able to do that. You have the beaver; they're able to kind of change and manipulate their environment, and I'm sure there's a few others, but that's the first thing that comes to mind. But when you start thinking about like what's in the ocean and whales, and the fact that they found languages in whales, especially orcas, and that was part of the problem with these parks that would have orcas in there is they would start beating each other up or tearing each other apart when they figured out that they were speaking different languages, and there's certain pods, and I'm sure have rivals. And so I'm wondering, all that aside, on the goats, you said you were able to find different dialects with them, but like how much were they able to keep the ungulates that you've studied? Is it just goats that you've studied?
No, I've studied in terms of vocal expression of emotions, domestic horses, Shevetsky's horses, pigs, wild boars, sheep, and I think in cattle also.
And cattle. Ooh, what did you find out with pigs? Because pigs are pretty smart too.
Yeah, I mean, it was not on their cognition. So in terms of proper cognition tests, I've only done that on goats. We tested what they can manipulate and how. So on pigs, it was on their vocal expression of emotions, and we basically carried out a pretty big study where we gathered lots of recordings in a collaboration between several teams, and we trained the machine learning algorithm to identify the emotion of the sounds, and the algorithm could classify 92% of the calls, so to tell us whether the call was produced in a emotionally positive or emotionally negative context.
Okay, so what? How you had a machine or an algorithm, right? A machine learning algorithm, yeah. Correct? And that was kind of how you studied it. And how would you get them to express, either negative or positive emotions in this study?
Yeah, so basically, we gathered all the recordings that we had in all the teams, which were from different contexts. For example, we had a team in Czech Republic working in piglets, so you had piglets in the farm being crushed by the mother. That happens sometimes, or missed nursing, or castration, which is part of the farm. And then also slaughterhouse recordings that we managed to get eventually, and more that we classified all as negative because that's context that the pigs should avoid and will threaten their life, basically. And so we had other positive context, which was together playing in a familiar environment, or running freely in a corridor, or nursing, or after nursing from the piglets. So the kinds of things that would usually increase your chance of survival and were thus labeled as positive, and then we validated whether this was likely indeed positive or negative based on the behavior of the pigs. We also, for some of the context, had the heart rate to know how intense was the emotion, so we had their heart rate with a heart rate monitor. And then we produced a picture of the sounds and then trained an algorithm to differentiate, to recognize from the picture of the sounds which ones were negative or positive. And that's feasible across all the contexts we had. Okay.
So, all right, you went to these places and recorded these sounds and then plugged that back into the algorithm? essentially?
Yeah, yeah. So we were all teams that had been working on expression of emotions in pigs before. So we used existing recordings from previous studies, and we collected new ones that we were missing, like the slaughterhouse or the more positive context. And then we cut all these sounds out, and then we fed them to the algorithm and trained the algorithm to identify these sounds.
Oh, that's sweet. That's definitely that's pretty sweet. First, I think I had that backwards for whatever reason. I was assuming you're. That makes a lot more sense as opposed to how I would have maybe set it up. Because I may have played the sounds to the pigs, but how are you going to know, or I don't know if you could have hooked something up like some sort of monitoring system. I don't know. It's not an EKG, and then like studied like the different reactions in the brain. And have there been studies like that done?
No, I don't know about their brain activity, but at least that's what we did also afterwards. So we played sounds of pigs to pigs and sounds of pigs to wild boars. So we did this study where we compared the cross species if they kind of perceive each other's emotions. So usually you would use a speaker and play back the sounds you recorded in a positive or negative context, and then see if you get some, if they differentiate between negative and positive sounds, and then also maybe if there is contagion of emotions. That's what we call contagion. So if when you play negative sounds, they show behavior that indicates that they're in a negative emotions, and when you play positive sounds, they become, they become in a, they experience positive emotions. And so we played pigs, wild boars, and human voice to the pigs and to the wild boars. And we did the same for domestic and Chevasquez horses. And we see that they do react differently when you play them negative or positive sound, whatever species it is, except for the wild boars.
Ooh, so why not the white boars? Are you playing white boars getting slaughtered, or do you think that they might not be able? Are you using? So you're using cross species, correct? In this study that we're talking about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea why the white boars weren't able to respond to some of these sounds from other species? Do you have a hypothesis on this?
So first, the sounds that we played them were, so in this study, which differed from the previous pig study we were talking about, so we simply had contact calls. So everything we played was just simply grunts, like grunts, or for the horses, whinnies. So we played them grunts that were either recorded in a short-term isolation, for example, for the domestic pigs, or in when they were together foraging, which were positive grunts. So they differed only really slightly. Even for human ear, it's very hard to differentiate between the two. And so we saw that they somehow, so the pigs, they reacted stronger when we played them negative sounds of either pigs or human or wild boar. But for the wild boars, they only reacted differently to the sounds of the pigs, which was a bit strange. So it could be the context in which we played the sounds, or it could be something else. But it was quite interesting because they reacted showing more negative behaviors to the positive pig sounds and vice versa with the negative pig sounds. And it could be because they express emotions in a different way. So when we had compared in a previous study how pigs and wild boars express emotions, we saw that they have some parameters that change in the same way and others that are completely different. So it could be that for wild boar, the positive pig sound negative, actually, maybe because of the domestication process or something else.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's actually kind of perplexing. It kind of throws a wrench in my thinking. I mean, because when you think about wild boars and pigs, it doesn't take long for a pig to kind of, I don't know, John, maybe look that up too. I don't know how long I think it's very, very short. When a domestic pig is able to break out, they completely transform like into almost a different entity in a very short amount of time. Start growing hair, they start growing tusks. So I would think that those two, I don't know what causes that I don't know what causes that transition, which would be, honestly, I'm sure that's been studied. But
I was going to say, I've read that too, that they're also the shape of their nose goes from being like flat and stubby to long and like shaped like a trowel so they can dig. And if that same pig or previously domesticated pigs are re-domesticated, their body will change back to the kind of like white fuzzy, normal pig
pinky
shape
soft.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that go ahead.
Sorry, they're very closely related. From what I remember, they don't have the same number of chromosomes exactly, but they are extremely closely related.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So what other like kind of fields do you think you'll end up staying in the behavioral or the emotional study of the animal emotions through language field, or are you planning on branching out and studying other things?
Well, actually, since so I moved to Copenhagen 3 years ago, and I broadened a bit. I used to work mostly on domestic species, or at least more farm animals, and now we have access to also some animals in the wild. So I've taken over a project on giraffe social networks, for example. So I broadened quite a lot to other species, and now in the group we have people working from whales to parakeets. So we actually have all kinds of projects. Most of them are related to either vocal communication or social networks, so how animals interact with each other, or emotions, or anything in between. So how vocalizations shape the network, how emotions influence vocal communication, etc.
Did you say you were studying giraffes?
Yes.
What is a social network of a giraffe? Because I have to confess, I don't know a ton about giraffes, but from what I do know, I feel like they're not running in large herds as something such as like a wildebeest or a Cape buffalo. I feel like it's like a mom and its offspring. So what would a social network of a giraffe look like?
Yeah, indeed, it's quite surprising for ungulates. I find that they are very lonely. Like if you see them in the wild, I was in South Africa to the field site where we send students, and we could always almost spot them alone or with their calves. Or I think one day they were suddenly in larger groups. But so that's a project that was started by my predecessor since 2012. So we have this long-term project where we study the same population every year. We send students on there to take pictures of the giraffe and find out who is spotted with who. And it was beforehand, it was believed that they have a very loose system where you don't have proper stable groups, but actually then they find out that they do stick more with particular individuals, especially females have more long-term relationships, so they are more often spotted with the same females. And this also changes with the season, so when there is lots of food, you have bigger groups, and also during the breeding season, so it changes throughout the year.
Yeah, so they do have social networks. I didn't know that. I really did not know that at all. I really thought that from all the nature films I've watched as a kid, they were always just chilling by themselves, it seems. But that you are able to get them now. How many individuals end up kind of gathering in these groups? What's the largest group that you guys were able to document? And then kind of as a follow-up question, are these social groups generally like mom and the offspring that end up gathering and reuniting?
I mean, the mom and offspring are usually always together. So when we make these social networks, we exclude the calves, because the calves, by definition, follow their mothers. So you can find connections even when you exclude the calves. But I can't remember the exact numbers of how big the groups can be. But from what I remember seeing, it was around 6 adult individuals that we usually say that they are together when they are about 100 meters apart and walking in the same direction. So the groups can be quite spread if you want. So that's why maybe if you spot them just once, you might also sometimes not see that they're actually together and there is one hiding there and one a bit further, but they're actually hanging out, if you want, at quite a distance.
Are the males, do they have social networks as well, or are they pretty much loners?
They're much more lonely than the females, but they will look for females during the breeding season, so they will start to join female groups.
Okay. Because I think about, like, let's see. Well, I'm on the male before the breeding season. Do they generally pair up in like bachelor groups? You know.
I can't remember. I have to admit.
Oh, no worries.
They do or not. No.
No worries at all. And then you said you had some of your some people on your team are studying whales. How are they? Are they studying the emotions that whales produce, and what types of whales are they looking into?
Not the emotions for the whales. That's much harder to do. It's a PhD student who works more on their energetics. So he put these big. Nowadays we have these so much technology that we can have tags to put on the whales. So. It's a tag that can both record a video and an acoustic recording and follow the whale, so measure all kinds of things about what the whale is doing, how deep and how much it turns around, how fast it goes. And so he's been mainly looking at brood whales, they're called, from South Africa and in Brazil as well, looking at how they hunt, like the different strategies they use. During lunges, like a lunge is when they go very deep and then they go up very fast with their mouth open to catch as much fish as they can. And he's been looking at whether we can find different lunges, if different whales use different strategies, and he's interested in how energetically costly these different lunges are, etc.
Oh, wow. Do you say how? Can you repeat that last part for me?
So he's interested in looking at how energetically costly different hunting strategies are.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's kind of curious. I'm kind of trying to figure out why. He's interested in the energy that they're expending on their hunting strategy. Like what's the interest there? I'm sure there's a reason. I just can't. It's not making sense in my head for whatever reason.
I mean, I guess the main aim would be to, whales are all quite threatened, and when you have boats around or if you have noise, you can. I think he's mostly originally interested in how much we impact on the whales, and so if there is not enough fish around, if there is noise, maybe they cannot communicate and find their prey, or if they use the noise of the prey, if you have lots of anthropogenic noise around, they might not be able to hunt as they want. And also, knowing in general, so why do they develop different strategies in different parts of the world? For example, in Brazil, they are there all year round, but then I think in the population he studied before in South Africa, they are not there all year round. So he's interested to see why is it different in different parts of the world? Do they use the same strategy to feed or not? And see.
Okay, that's starting making sense, right? I think of like there's certain pods of orcas, let's say in the Arctic, that will have figured out a strategy to they'll go in let's say a group like 4 or 5 wide, and there'll be a seal on an ice, not an iceberg, but a block of ice, and they'll go really, really fast and create a wave to knock the seal off of that, that, what did I just say? Not an iceberg, but like a block of ice, right? Just floating in the sea. And that was one strategy that people have observed. So thank you so much for the clarification there. That's super fascinating. I definitely love whales, and I definitely am more interested in like whales or like orcas and dolphins. I actually was just in Alaska and was able to see a few humpbacks. And what was the most surprising thing was I ended up seeing a few dolphins. I had no idea that they were that far north. I always thought of dolphins as being more tropical creatures, but that was super cool. If you ever get a chance, head up to Alaska.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So I want to kind of get back into you said you studied horses, domestic horses, correct?
Yes.
And I'm curious to know kind of was it the same type of using sound, same study that you ran on the horses you did on the pigs and the skylarks?
Yeah, so I looked at their vocal expression of emotions. Then we also played the sounds. They were part of this study this cross-study species where we played them. So for the domestic horses, we played them Przewalski's horse whinnies, which are very similar in human voice, human actor's voice, to see if they differentiate between positive and negative emotions. And the very interesting thing about horses that I figured out when I started looking at horses is that they do biphonation. That's basically producing two frequencies at the same time. So when you hear a horse, you kind of have the feeling that you hear two horses at the same time. And it's very rare. So, I mean, mammals do it a lot, but very sporadically, when a baby is screaming and then you hear this kind of two sounds because the vocal folds get decoupled, that's called. But in horses, they basically, in all the whinnies, you have one low pitch and one high pitch. And they produce them at the same time. So now I have a student actually who's looking at where are they produced in the vocal tract and how and what is the function of these two frequencies.
Yeah, what are some of the hypotheses for the function of these two frequencies?
So in the first study I've done where we're looking at emotions, probably they also provide different kinds of information, but we had found that the lowest one indicate how intense is the emotion, and the highest one indicates whether the emotion is positive or negative, which is what we call the valence. And probably they also encode probably other kinds of information, but that was interesting to see that they separate. So that's what we call segregation of information. So one frequency indicates something and the other one indicates something else. So probably they have developed that to be able to communicate more information than with just one frequency.
That's pretty cool. Is that unique to? That's just unique to horses so far, as you can tell, right?
I mean, in birds do that a lot because they have a different organ to produce sounds, and they can actually very easily produce two different sounds at the same time. So that's known for birds. But for mammals, there are a few species that have shown biphonation, but very often it's more sporadic, like I mentioned. Like I think all mammals produce biphonation at some point when they, for example, scream or call very loud, but not systematically like horses.
That's so cool. Now, this is primarily in domesticated horses. Have you looked at wild horses are doing this as well?
Yeah, so the Przewalski's horses, they have very similar structure and they also have these two frequencies. And actually we've been looking also at students doing some small project trying to look at donkeys and mules, and I also have a PhD student working on zebras. And so far, the mules, it was not really clear because we didn't find enough individuals, but donkeys don't have biphonation and zebras either. So it seems to be something very specific to horses.
That is pretty fascinating. And I would expect that you would find that in mules as well, potentially, because a mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey. So I would assume that would wind up. Is that, and you haven't been able to find enough individuals yet, but of the individuals that you have found, have you noticed that?
Yeah, so far the recordings we got were not good enough, so we couldn't spot biphonation, but I have another student trying to find mules at the moment, so we'll soon find out. But they probably should have, because their call is really a mix between a donkey and a horse, so they have this kind of breathing in and out, and sometimes it sounds more like a whinny, and sometimes it sounds more like a donkey sound.
Yeah, I don't know what you'd call that donkey sound either.
A bray, I think.
A bray, yeah, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay. All right. So that, I mean, I'm loving this work, and it's very exciting to kind of, when John came to me and let me know that this was being studied, I had no idea that, you know, there was this section of study in biology. So this has been very, very interesting for me to kind of dive in here. There's a lot that I don't know. I'm definitely not a trained scientist, but I really love this work. And I mean, when in terms of the future and the future studies, like what most excites you, you know, going forward in this field that you're studying?
I would say at the moment, so the student working on horses, he's very close to find out where these two frequencies are being produced. So that's quite exciting. He's actually on the side been looking also at whether we can use a machine learning algorithm to classify positive and negative emotions of all the species are recorded at the same time as a kind of universal translator. So that's also quite exciting. And we are trying to look more into the contagion side that we were talking about before. So how emotions are spread within a group. So, for example, I have a postdoc doing that on sheep. We're trying to kind of map, you know, like when you play a sound to sheep, high and more intense or less intense call, then how does the information spread in the group, and how does the emotion affect the other animals?
Now, how would one, like, what do you think some of the applications would be for this contagion? Like how would you apply this, if that question makes sense?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are many applications. The applications for the production side, you have many already, because you can build an app or a tool. That's what we're planning to do on the pigs. That would record the animals and tell you if the animal is more likely in a positive emotional state or negative emotional state. And for the contagion, if we can find calls that have an effect on the animals, then you could likely play positive calls to put the animals in a more positive state. Or in a farm, when you need to have procedure that stresses them a bit because you need to, I don't know, cut their hooves or something that you need to do, or a medical intervention, maybe you can find calls that relax them. So some people have been trying to use music, for example, but music is very human-like. You know, you need to find something that is relevant for them. So, for example, playing sounds of relaxed sounds of any other animals, if it would make them more relaxed, then that would be very useful.
Yes, that would be. My mind always goes to the nefarious when you say contagions. Like, what are the? It always goes to the negative side of things. I wasn't thinking about that, but that's super. And then, so how have you guys started developing this? The app or the tool yet, or are you still needing more data?
No, we have enough data, but we still need to somehow meet with all my colleagues and decide which direction do we take. Do we or go for just an app on the phone, or do we get for an actual on-farm tool that could record the sounds and analyze everything? And so we then need to decide, like, who do we go for, like what do we go for, and how.
Okay, awesome. Well, I mean, again, I'm very excited, and I can't wait. What do you think kind of the timeline is for the creation of this tool? I know that's kind of a hard question to ask, because there's a lot of variables in play here. But like, when ideally when you like to have this out by?
Yeah, it's difficult to say, because we're like the team of collaborators from many different countries, and we're all people very busy with teaching and all kinds of things other than that and other projects. So far we haven't been able to talk together and decide what do we do. Do we apply for more funding? Do we just contact a company? So what do we do? But I think once we have decided, there are some easy options that would take a few months. So I don't know, I would hope that by next year also we can first publish the calls we had as an open database for research, and also build some kind of app or tool for farmers.
Yeah. So primarily, do you think any use for in the veterinarian field? I feel like that would be, to me, that seems like the most a good place for this application, but also farms as well.
Yeah. So this one would be for pigs, could be valid for farmers in general, also veterinarian, also people assessing the welfare on farm, inspectors, for example. It could be could have lots of different applications.
Yeah, I didn't think about, if you're going out there and accessing the welfare on farms, you could have an app that could kind of judge whether the animals are being mistreated or not. So that's fascinating. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I'm wondering, do you have any social media? Do you have any books out there that people could read, or kind of how do people get in contact or learn more about this?
They could have a look at our group website, for example, to see the different projects we work on and all our publications, and then find links to our press releases or other things.
All right, fantastic. Well, we'll put all of that in the show notes. Again, I really appreciate you coming on this podcast, and I've had a blast. There's a lot of interesting applications, and definitely, when that app gets out, we'll definitely have you back on and kind of go over that. But again, thank you so much, and you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for inviting me. Have a nice day.